is a huge win for free speech.
He performed a tremendous public service. No one should spend a day in prison for giving the public newsworthy and important information.
Regardless of what you think of his activities, Mr. Assange's case had dragged on for far too long.
Julian needs time to recover.
Assange has been badly mistreated, and certainly even he's being freed, no justice has been served.
To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with a rather unlikely homecoming for Wikileaks founder Julian Assange. Assange arrived in Australia Wednesday with extradition to the United States no longer a possible threat. The U.S. wanted Assange to stand trial, charging that he violated the Espionage Act when he posted classified documents in 2011 on his internet platform, Wikileaks. Now, this is a case that has spanned 3 presidencies, from Obama to Trump to Biden. Extradition and a trial seemed certain until news that a plea deal had been reached was announced. Assange entering a plea of guilty, receiving a sentence of time already served, his conviction lending credibility to the U.S. case against him, at the same time allowing Assange to walk away a free man.
Free at last and back in the fold of his family, wife Stella and father John, in his native Australia for the first time in over a decade. For Julian Assange, arriving at Canberra Airport was the final act of an international drama that included 7 years refuge in London's Ecuadorian embassy and 5 more in a British high-security prison. A consequence of publishing hundreds of thousands of classified US documents on his Wikileaks whistleblowing website. It made him a hero to free speech campaigners, but a villain to the US government, which said he'd endangered national security. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese lobbied for years to free Assange. He spoke to him by phone after his plane landed.
He was very generous in his praise of the Australian government's efforts. The Australian government stands up for Australian citizens.
Assange's wife Stella said her husband needed time to recuperate before speaking to the press, but she thanked his supporters on his behalf.
It took millions of people. It took people working behind the scenes, people protesting on the streets for days and weeks and months and years. And we achieved it.
Assange's final showdown took place in a courtroom in a US Pacific Island territory where he was sentenced to time already spent in prison. His lawyers expressed relief, but said the plea deal highlights dangers to press freedom.
In order to win his freedom, Julian pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage for publishing evidence of US war crimes, human rights abuse and US wrongdoing around the world. This is journalism. This is the criminalization of journalism.
No one should spend a day in prison for giving the public newsworthy and important information. In this case, information that the United States government had committed war crimes. He performed a tremendous public service, not a crime.
Julian Assange will no longer have to look over his shoulder. Whatever comes next professionally, he'll first enjoy some well-deserved time with his family.
Well, I'm joined now by Thomas Reid. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and founding director of the Alperovitch Institute for Cybersecurity Studies. Professor Reid, it's good to have you on the program this evening. I want to start by talking about the platform first instead of the man. Wikipedia. Is the platform created by Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, sorry. Is it a force for good?
I think it's really important to look at WikiLeaks in a nuanced way. WikiLeaks has been both a force for transparency, but really has also been abused by bad actors, and most notably, of course, the Russian intelligence agency, GRU. And bear in mind, the evidence that this happened is overwhelmingly strong. And it's just clear that this happened. WikiLeaks emerged at a time on the internet when the internet, early 2000s, mid 2000s, was still seen as this unabashed good thing. But keep in mind, influence operations dominated in the Cold War, and now they're back with a vengeance. So we should expect leak sites of all sorts moving forward, and we've seen this in 2016, to be abused as well by bad actors, by malicious actors.
And are we talking about, if we compare 2006 to 2024, the internet is different, his platform is different, but also the nature of exposing the truth, it has also changed, hasn't it?
The nature of exposing the truth has changed, but I think it's important to appreciate we live in a time where activism is, again, a very widespread thing in terms of there are lots of people who have self-interest in spreading certain types of news. And indeed, we, especially in the United States, see forms of journalism that are really hard to distinguish from activism, ultimately. And this leads to this really important understanding, insight, that the more ideologically committed somebody is, and there's no doubt that, for example, Julian Assange, and especially the supporters of WikiLeaks, were quite ideologically committed in favor of their project, the more ideologically committed you are, the easier it is to take advantage of your platform and really of yourself. And I think we've seen this again and again, not only with WikiLeaks, but also with other anonymous platforms and forums.
Who benefits the most from platforms like WikiLeaks, which claim to be about promoting transparency?
I think the only honest answer to this question is that it really depends on the specific case. There are certainly situations where leak platforms have essentially helped transparency, helped curtail and put a check on, government overreach or even companies doing the wrong thing. But in some cases, of course, they will be abused. And then what's missing here is of course, an editorial oversight. Right. If your business model is keeping sources anonymous at all cost, sometimes not even knowing who your own sources are, that is very different from journalism, where you really should know where the source is, even if you keep it anonymous, and also where you make editorial and really also ethical decisions on what it is okay to disclose and what it is not okay to disclose. That are both editorial oversight and ethical choices have often been missing in the case of leak sites and WikiLeaks specifically.
And does that worry you, Professor? I mean, if I compare what we saw, for example, with the Pentagon Papers and the process that was followed before anything was ever printed in terms of curating and filtering what was actually going to be published, did that process, was there anything like that taking place at WikiLeaks? Or were we talking about information that was simply dumped into the public sphere to be filtered as it may?
Yeah. And again, here the answer is it depends on the case. There were certain leaks that were curated and, in fact, prepared with a lot of labor and work. And sometimes even forms of decisions were made to keep certain things out, it appears. But this leads to one of the paradoxes when we talk about WikiLeaks. While WikiLeaks obviously celebrates transparency, we don't really understand very well how WikiLeaks as an organization actually worked. There's only one person representing it, Julian Assange. But of course, he wasn't the only one working for it. So the entire setup that is WikiLeaks, how it made decisions, what to accept, what not to accept, for example, how it prepped certain releases, the The Podesta leaks is one of the most famous ones, where one leak was released every day for the final 30 days of the 2016 US election. How was that decision made? Why was it made? Another one is the famous CIA leak, Vault 7 and then Vault 8, that was also released in a way that was designed to maximize effectively the impact on CIA and the US government. What were the decisions there in this context? These are some hard questions and we have no answers for them.
Yeah, it feels like 2024, we're back to where we were maybe 2016, when we're talking about the influence that these platforms can have on democracy, on elections. Before we run out of time, I want to ask you about the person, Julian Assange, and the I guess his orbit. What do you make of those supporters, and there seem to be many of them, who see Assange as a champion of free speech?
I think when we talk about leak sites, when we talk about charismatic individuals around leaks, Assange is one example, but also Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, we have to appreciate that we have to embrace, in a way, the contradiction. We have to be able to make have two different insights at the same time. Yes, they, on the one hand, advanced transparency, and we learned a lot through their leaks, but at the same time, they also made, in many cases, ethically, the clearly wrong decisions to release information that should never have become public about certain individuals, victims of the Saudi government in Wikileaks' case is one example, or indeed just straight up foreign intelligence operations that have no link to surveillance in the case of Snowden. Both can be true. They can be a force for good and a force for bad at the same time.
Yeah, transparency at any price. That seems to be the enduring question here. Professor Thomas Reid of Johns Hopkins University. Professor, we appreciate your time, your excellent analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, for more now, I'm joined by Charlie Becket. Charlie wrote the book about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, entitled WikiLeaks News in the Networked Era. He is also a professor at the Department of Media and Communications at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Charlie, it's good to have you back on the show. You and I spoke, I think it was about 5 years ago, about this very case. How surprised are you that now in 2024, the Julian Assange saga has come to an end?
I think it's really sad that it's taken so long, but I am absolutely delighted that this has happened. It's taken so long because such entrenched positions on both sides. And in the end, it was a political, not miracle, but a really deft bit of diplomacy by the Australian Labour leader, Albanese.
Why do you say
in
that?
The past,
Why do you say political miracle?
Because there was an apparently entrenched position, which was that the American government, American military certainly, were really embarrassed by what WikiLeaks did, by what Assange did, by leaking what were, illegally obtained data, which was incredibly embarrassing to them. And I understand why they're furious. On the other hand, there's a well-established public interest right for journalists to do that if it reveals important information that the public needs to know. And there were previously opportunities to do something about this. Obama's administration had said they were prepared to think about this, that they recognized that there was this First Amendment right of someone like Assange to do this. But obviously then there was the Trump presidency and so on. And then in Australia itself, and bear in mind, he's an Australian, and I think it's very clever of Albanese to do this as a kind of patriotic gesture. And because Australia is such a very strong military ally with the United States, I think it had the credibility to be able to pull this off. And there was a very clever, legal compromise. And that's unusual with Julian Assange. Julian Assange is not somebody who likes to compromise. And in this case, he clearly has done by, accepting this very tokenistic plea of guilty so that he could resolve the situation.
Yeah, it was a plea deal. He had to plead guilty to at least one of the charges against him. And I'm wondering then, haven't U.S. authorities, haven't they achieved what they wanted when they began the path to prosecution here. I mean, you and I talked about the threat to journalists in the United States being able to report on sensitive stories and fear of reprisal by the government. And there was this fear of a chilling effect if indeed Assange were to be found guilty. Well, he's admitted to his own guilt. He's not going to prison and he's back in Australia, but the admission is there.
No, I think we're okay on that, Brent. I think that we all know this is a token step by Assange. The judge in the Supreme Court in the UK recognised that he had this public interest defence, and even the judge in this case has recognised that. The fact that he has not been put on trial for treason, I'm not saying this is a blow for press freedom, of course it's not, but I think it's a practical compromise. And I think, in that American context where you have a presidential candidate, i.e. Donald Trump, threatening to lock up opponents and, threatening the media with judicial, political and real violence, I think that's an important signal. I think it's good that the Biden administration, if you like, allowed this to happen.
Mm-hmm. Are you concerned, though, that in the future, reporters who are covering stories that have to do with national security, that have access to classified material that is leaked to them, that they may decide to kill a story instead of going forward with it because of this chilling effect that I was talking about? I mean, are we not somewhat, burned children, if you will, because of this?
Maybe a little bit, but I don't think so. I mean, I was just thinking your previous report on Kenya, one of the revelations from Wikileaks was about corruption in Kenya. And it was because the Kenyan media were too intimidated to be able to report it themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way it's going to go, that we are going to continue to get these alternative type media outlets like Wikileaks, who will do the revelatory investigative journalism. And I agree with you, Brent, mainstream media is somewhat intimidated, especially around the world. In America, at least, we have the First Amendment. In places like the UK, we still have a judicial system where Assange has been trapped in it, for the last 10 years or so. But at least we have that system. So I hope that it doesn't have that chilling effect. And I don't think that it will be particularly significant, certainly in Western media markets.
Okay. Charlie Becket, author of WikiLeaks News in the Networked Era. We appreciate your time and always your valuable insights, Charlie. Thank you.